Hey guys, my name is Daniel Sun, and this is a 1976 Fiat 124. Now we are putting a turbo on it, and in today's video, this thing will be running. Now I know what you might be thinking. That car is gonna blow up, but you're wrong, right, Logan?
That's right.
See, that's all the confirmation you need. Now this build got inspired by a version of this car from 1981, 1982, those were the years, that actually came with a turbo. It made about 120 horsepower, not that much, but they're extremely rare and they're kind of hard to find. So I've decided to build my own. Now that version of the car was actually fuel injected from the factory, which actually made it a little easier, and it had the turbo already. This is a 1976. This came with a carburetor, no turbo, and no power. Now, so far, I've had to add an intake, I've had to add injectors, I've had to put a turbo on it, and an intercooler. Not to even mention that I have to do an entire wiring harness with a brand new brain because from the factory, it didn't have an ECU either. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and get dirty. Okay, so I guess Magic Mike's is in town.
What's going on, man?
Hey, you remember last time when you were here? This thing was running.
Yeah, and now it looks like you've added a few things.
Yeah, it's not running anymore.
It's only a matter of time. I know you'll get it running eventually.
Yeah, as you can see, we've done a lot. We went from a carburetor to a
fuel injection and
Yep.
a turbocharger. I like the copper pipes that you installed. Those look very nice.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird idea. I just kind of mentioned it to Wizard. Wizard thought it was going to be cool, so he decided to go buy everything, and I'm like, okay. So I installed it. I still have to solder it all together, but yeah, that's at least it's all cut and routed.
Yeah.
And then over here, the big old turbo, you know, the old tiny snail.
Hey, that's more than enough for this engine.
Yeah, this thing can actually put out 15 pounds according to the brochure.
Holy cow, that's a lot more than I would have thought, but I guess that's more than what you need for this engine. Well, how hard was it to mount this intercooler? I mean, it looks like you had plenty of space up here.
Yeah, luckily I had a lot of room. I really just had to cut the hole for the routing the pipes through the radiator support.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like you've made quite a bit of progress. I know you've still got some more work to do. It looks like you're going to be changing up some of the wiring, probably going with an ECU now, adding all of these sensors.
So I've decided to go with the Link ECU. It's just basically a straight bare bones ECU. You have to wire from scratch. You have to tune it from scratch.
Okay.
So I have to completely do a custom harness for this because even if I wanted to use the old wiring, it was meant for a carbureted car. There's no wires from the old harness that go to the injectors because there weren't any.
Yeah.
So, and now we also need a crank and a cam signal, obviously. Well, we don't need the cam signal, but I was able to figure that out. And we're going to use a crank angle sensor that we're going to adapt to the factory distributor so we can get those two signals for the ECU.
That's pretty smart. I don't think I've seen anything like that before.
Yeah, that one's going to be tricky.
Yeah.
But it's from a Nissan, actually, from an RB25.
Really?
I was able to pick one up, and we got everything ready well, we have to still make the mount for it. We still have to figure that out.
What is this knock signal level gauge?
So this gauge right here is to be able to detect knock. It's very useful when you're tuning. Let's say you have any, you're adjusting your timing and stuff like that, and you are dealing with how much you can squeeze out from that fuel, because fuel has to be more stable the more boost you add. And this really tells you how to limit that timing so you don't add too much timing and start getting knock and then basically blowing up your engine.
Okay.
Now, this gauge is actually made by FWLR Tuning, so make sure to check them out. Link is going to be in the description down below. And this thing is amazing. But yeah, this is probably going to go right around here somewhere.
Wherever it fits.
Yep, somewhere in there.
Well, it looks like you've got plenty of work to do. I need to go ahead and bounce on out of here, but I'm really excited to see what this is like to drive when you're done.
Dude, I can't wait until this thing is done. Maybe we can take it down to where you live. Maybe take it around your the farm and just kind of
rip it around and see what it can do.
Yes,
we'll
for sure.
Compare it to the Mercedes and see who's got more power.
Dude.
Always a pleasure. This
is an oil pan. I need to drill a hole on the side of it because we need to connect this oil drain line from the turbo. Now we're going to do that using this AN fitting that's going to be plugged here on the side. Now you may be wondering, why am I doing this? So turbos actually get oil from the oil pump, and then they have to drain all that oil back into the sump so it can continue a cycle. So this is what that line's for. Man, somebody used some pliers on this thing. Oh no. Had less threads than I thought it did. It's like perfect on the inside. So let's go ahead and thank our sponsor, Auto Recambi. Auto Recambi has been a major player in this build. They've supplied me with all the parts that I needed. So make sure to go ahead and check them out. Their website is going to be down in the description below. So they also have a YouTube channel that has a bunch of how-to videos so you can work on your own Fiat too. That'll also be in the description down below. So check them out. Okay. Now that we're done with the drain line, we have to install an oil feed line. Now this goes here, and we have to route it all the way over here. Now that I have oil going to the turbo, we need to focus on the wastegate because I needed to clock this to line up the intercooler pipes. This doesn't fit anymore. So I need to drill 2 new holes to make it fit. Now this is the stock fan that came out of the car. As you can see, it's pretty small. We're gonna upgrade it. Something twice as big. So let's start with the intake plenum. This car had a carburetor. Why didn't I just run the turbo straight to the carburetor? Well, you kind of can, but it's just a lot of fabrication. So we decided to go with the easier route because they made later models of this car that had the fuel injection and they had this closed off intake plenum, which makes it very easy to be able to run a pipe and just seal it all off. Now I installed 4 injectors. This will allow me to have more precise control over the fuel amount going into the engine. Now, another great thing is since the computer's controlling these injectors, if you change altitudes and stuff like that, it can actually adjust the fueling for you so you don't have to go in there and change jets like you do on a carburetor. Now, another big thing about tuning is timing. Originally, this car came with a distributor that had contact points. This is technology from the 70s. You would see these wires actually go straight to that distributor, but now they're gonna go to 4 brand new modern coils that we're gonna use because these are far more versatile and you can adjust that time. You can be more precise. This is a very good upgrade. Because we're increasing horsepower, we need more fuel. Now the pump that's on the car right now is perfectly fine for a carburetor at like 5 PSI. So for our setup, we're gonna need much more pressure. This pump can do about 90 PSI. Higher pressure is not the only thing we need. We also need fuel volume to be able to support the higher horsepower. So right off the fuel tank, we have the pre-filter. Then we have the fuel pump, and then we have the main filter for the system. The lines route all the way underneath the body, up through the firewall, and then under the hood. Now, if you think that the routing is a little janky, it's because it is. We're on a time frame. We want to finish the car, so we made it safe enough for us to be able to drive it. Under the hood right here, this is our main fuel line. So this comes straight from the fuel pump. As you can see, goes into the fuel rail, all the way across, and then comes up through here into the fuel pressure regulator, and then comes out the bottom right here. This is the return line that goes back to the fuel tank so you can create that loop. Now this right here is a vacuum line. In this case, it's going to be a boost reference to the pressure regulator so it can actually up the PSI as the turbo is building up more boost. Now I'm going to start all 4 coils and the wires going to them. I got all 4 coils to start with the respective wires. All I got left is to install the connectors that go to the harness that go to the ECU. The next step is assembling the intercooler pipes. Now, as you can see, these are copper. So you can't just simply like take a hose and a clamp and just put it together. You have to solder them, which is a pain. My experience with soldering comes from YouTube videos that I've seen here and there. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how this is going to turn out, if it's even going to hold up. Let's see what happens. So we're going to go ahead and solder this pipe. It's almost to the finish line. Now we need to weld the exhaust. I'm gonna have to weld a bunch of pieces coming right off the turbo into the factory exhaust just for the sake of it being a little easier. Too big. So this right here is the downpipe coming out of the turbo. As you can see, there's a hole right here and it's threaded. That is where the oxygen sensor or wideband goes. We are going to need that for tuning because we need to know what the air fuel mixture is on the car. So we know if we need to give it more fuel or less fuel. I'm going to start the wiring harness. Now, like I said, I need to make this from scratch. So this little guy right here, which is our main connector, I have to turn it into a full-blown wiring harness. Now I have a bunch of stuff on this table that we're gonna use to do just that. This is a roll of TXL. This is a very high quality wire. Over here in this area, I have a bunch of connectors, pins, and sockets. We're gonna need these to crimp it on the wire. This is just a normal label maker. It actually comes with a normal cartridge where you can print a normal label and stick it on stuff. But they sell a cartridge that has heat shrink tubing in it that you can put text on. Now I printed a few examples, and when you put them over the wire, you can heat shrink them. Now I'm not gonna do that for this. This is just a demonstration, but the wires are gonna be labeled, which makes it super easy to know which wire is which because they're all black wires. So unless you're gonna ohm them every time you're doing something, you need to label them, and this is a really nice way to do it. It's pretty late right now. We're pulling an all-nighter again, but I am determined to finish this car. Now, I've made some decent progress on the wiring harness, and let's go ahead and start right here at the relay box. This relay box has about 6 relays, and we're not going to use all of them. So far, I've used 3, and I got a couple of outputs right here. So I got this blue one is going to go to our fuel pump, yellow one goes to our fan, and then this green one is the one powering our ECU injector coils. And if we follow this, go all the way over here, you can see one of our wires is this one right here. It says ECU 12 volts. It's powering our ECU and our CAN lambda. This wire is connected to a junction all the way up here that also powers the coils, which is this guy right here, which I still haven't spliced in to wire the coils in, and to this one right here, which is the injectors. Now, this injector branch holds or 4 trigger wires for the injectors, and I added 4 power wires for those injectors. These 4 wires over here are the 4 ignition triggers, and then this is going to be our power that goes to those coils. Now I still am missing a ground, which we'll be adding as well. These are the plugs for the coils. As you can see, they're all wired in, heat shrink, crimped, all that stuff. We have a total of 4 wires. Now, when I looked at the diagram for the Maserati Ghibli, because these came out of a Ghibli, you can see that it has 2 grounds. This green wire is going to be our main power wire, and then this is a trigger that goes to the ECU. Now, luckily, these coils have internal igniter, so I don't need to install an external one. Makes it a little easier. But these are ready to be plugged in. This branch, which is probably the biggest one of them all, holds all our sensors. So coolant temperature, we got the map sensor, we have the TPS sensor, crank, cam. Also, it holds the power and ground for all of those sensors as well. These 3 wires actually come from the FWLR knock monitor, and we have ground, signal, and power. We got to wire these into the ECU, and then we can put the gauge on the inside and hook up the knock sensor to it. I had to make a quick change on this TPS. Now, this is a throttle position switch, not a throttle position sensor. So it's not really going to work with our ECU. So I had to find another one. I actually found this one in one of my, scrap boxes or whatever, where I keep a lot of scrap electronics. Now, this one doesn't fit here very well. So I had to just make it work so we can start the car and tune it and stuff like that. But this should be fine for testing purposes. I will be replacing it with something better. Probably replace the connector too. But for now, this will be fine. So we just finished installing the throttle position sensor. Now we're going to move over to the crank angle sensor. Now this little guy right here comes from a R34, the Gallo 12 engine, not the Gallo 24. The Gallo 24 has too many slices. Now the crank angle sensor gives me 2 very important signals. It gives me the crank position signal and the cam position signal. So I need these 2 signals to do a full sequential firing on the ECU, fuel sequential strategy. Basically, what it means is the injector knows exactly where top dead center is, and it'll fire for number 1, and then number 3, 4, 2, just following the firing order. The same with the coils. They'll be able to do the same thing. Now, if I do not have the cam, just a crank signal, I can still run the car and it'll run just fine, but it'll do something called batch fire. It'll spray 1 and then maybe 3 as well, because it doesn't really know which one is supposed to fire, because it doesn't know exactly the position of top dead center to know where to start. It just doesn't know where the starting line is, so it just sprays 2 at a time just to make sure that it got the right one. And then I also thought this was a 5-volt sensor. It's actually 12 volts. You have to put 12 volts in, so I had to rewire a little bit, but I fixed it. And yeah, now this thing is ready to go after we figure out how to attach it to the camshaft. This is what I came up with for the crank and cam signal that we need for our ECU. So we used the stock distributor. We kind of modified it a little bit, modified the shaft, and then we plopped the crank angle sensor on there and we tightened it down. We had to machine a lot. It wasn't that easy, but it actually works. So all we have to do is install it, set our timing, and that should be it for this. Get in there. So I wired up the ECU, the sensors, and I even wrapped the harness. I also plugged in the fuel pump. Now, I want to button up everything else just off camera, get it all done, because I want to move on to tuning. This is the part that I'm most excited about. We're about to tune this car. Now we're going to start with building a base file. So the ECU is already installed and wired in. Now we need to go on the computer and start programming it. Now this is the software that we're going to use, and we need to start right there at configuration, which is the first step. Now this is a factory information manual. We have this because we're going to be pulling some information from here. Now right here we have the displacement, and then over here we have the firing order, which we also are going to need. So we're going to start with, it is a 4-cylinder, it is a 4-stroke, and then right here, all the way down here, we got to do the firing order table. And we got that number here in the manual. So it's 1, 3, 4, 2. So that's all good. Let's go ahead and add all the settings for fuel setup. So right here on fuel setup, on our fuel main, we're going to choose our correct injection mode, which is sequential because we have a crank and cam signal. Now we're going to go to engine capacity. Now this engine, which we have it over here on our manual, is a 1,756 cc's. So that's what we're going to put in there, 1,756 cc's. Now it is map reference since we have a map installed in the intake. All this stuff can stay like this for now. Now the next table in fuel setup is going to be the injector setup. The injectors that we put on this car actually come from an Acura RDX. If you bought these, you don't get any information because they're typically just meant to be installed on the car. The car already programmed for them. That's why they come with a part number. Now we're using it on this car and the ECU does not know anything about them. So we need to tell it what they are. And this file right here that I have in the computer, my buddy was able to get it. We sent the injectors over to Motec and Motec was able to tell us all the information about them. They tested them, they did their magic, and now we have a file where we can input those values and the ECU knows exactly what it's working with. So I put in all the data that I needed for the injectors and I also set the base fuel pressure to 300 kPa or about 45 PSI. Now we're gonna go ahead and move to ignition. Now in the ignition main, we're gonna set the ignition mode. Because we installed 4 individual coils from a Maserati, we are able to do direct spark. So that's the option that we're going to use. Now, as you can see, there's other settings. We're not going to worry about them right now. I do know that the spark edge falling, that is correct. Now, the other ones, nothing to worry about right now. Now, after ignition, we're going to go into engine protection. We're going to set our RPM limit so the engine doesn't over rev. We are going to do fuel cut. The reason we do fuel cut is to avoid the backfiring, that fire that comes out of the tailpipe, because that really stresses the engine and this engine is old. So we're going to go ahead and do fuel cut. Yes, fuel cut is completely safe. This is what most manufacturers use on cars. Now right here, this is the table for the RPM limit. As you can see, is using your coolant to really, you can tell it if you want lower RPMs when it's cold, and then as it warms up, it'll open up more of the RPM availability. Now it's all set to 0. So we're going to go ahead and set it to a number. Now, I believe that the RPM limit is 65 on this car from the factory. So we're going to go ahead and maybe, I don't know, bump it a little bit to maybe 7,000. Might be a little bit too much, a 500 RPM increase, but I think we'll be careful. I think it'll be fine. Now, our next engine protection setting is going to be the overboost protection. We do not want to overboost on this engine because it is very weak. It is very old. It might blow up. So we're going to go ahead and set up that table right now. So I decided to set it to 10 PSI. It doesn't matter at what RPM it is or what boost level at 10. As soon as it hits 10 PSI, it will cut fuel so the car does not overboost. Now in this one, I'm just going to run through them real quick, just so you guys kind of know. This is going to be our AUX outputs. This is outputs from the ECU to relays and stuff like that. Now we have engine fan, fuel pump control, and then the taco. We have a relay for this, we have a relay for the fuel pump, and then for the taco, it's just a wire that goes straight to it. I still haven't wired this one up. I'm having some issues. Now the next one is going to be the analog inputs. This is going to be all the sensors sending information to the ECU. So we have the EAT, which is intake air temperature. We have that one. We have a map sensor. We have a throttle position sensor. And then we have a lambda right here, lambda 1, which actually I believe this one is canned, so it might not be this one. It might be down on another spot. Now the last thing we're going to set up is our wideband gauge. Now this one, we have a independent module that communicates to the ECU through CAN. So we have to set that up so the ECU knows exactly what the information coming from that sensor is. So we have to make sure they're communicating properly. Now this is just a base file. This is just to get the car running. I still have to go in and calibrate all the sensors, and I also have to tell the ECU what the outputs are so it knows what relay turns on the pump or maybe the fan. And then I also have to tell it what top dead center is. There's a procedure here, and we're going to be using our CAS, obviously, from an R34 to be able to tell the ECU where top dead center is so it knows when to fire correctly. Oh, we got a fuel pump. Okay, we're neutral. Okay, that didn't turn on. We might have to mess with some settings. Now, I've been trying to get this car started for hours and it just won't start. I think I know what the problem is though. We're having issues with our crank angle sensor. We do have a signal coming from the sensor, which is this one right here. This is our RPM signal. And as you can see, it's there. You can see the up and down waveform. And then down here, this is our cam signal, which is also detecting. Now our problem is it can see that, but it will not turn this into an RPM signal for the ECU. Right here on engine speed, RPM, I always get a 0. It will not show anything. Doesn't matter how much I crank it. Doesn't matter if the speed is high, because this engine is turning at least 300 RPM, which is more than enough for it to capture a good engine speed signal for it to start. And it's just not doing it. Now, I did come up with a solution. There's a company that sells a disc that actually is a little bit lower resolution, but it's far easier to read. And I believe it has nothing to do with the software as far as the problem with this crank angle sensor. The problem is with, I believe, the version of Windows. There were some updates done and the software has some issues. I don't have Windows 11s on hand, and it's far cheaper for me to get the simpler optical disc instead of trying to make this one work or updating to Windows to be able to make it work. Now, with that said, it's already ordered. It's coming in the mail. So we're going to go ahead and jump to whenever it arrives. So we got the new optical disc. So we're going to put it in and see if that fixes our problem. I installed the optical disc, I adjusted all the settings, and I also calibrated it. So now it's a moment of truth. Let's see if this thing will start. Hey, look at that! Woo! Oh, let's go check it out. Okay, let's turn it off and see if everything is okay. That ran. That ran. That actually ran. It's a little rough, but it ran. It's been about 4 months of work figuring this out. Yeah, it's great. That is great. So we finally got it running, but I will not be driving it in this video. I will actually save that for Wizard's video because this is a collaboration. He bought the car, he paid for all of this. All I had to do was build it. Now I do have a surprise feature that I'll be adding here in secret that he doesn't know about. But if you want to check that out, make sure to keep your eyes open for a video from the Car Wizard. Let me know in the comments if you love the build. I got more videos coming, more content coming, and I'm really excited to share with you guys. So on that note, I will see you on the next video.